In the last video, we made it so cart items would display in the cart view. However, you'll notice that the cart item that we currently have in the cart isn't rendering correctly. We can't see the title or the image or any other details. So in this video, we're going to fix that. Plus, we're also going to bind this quantity input and the remove button to our Vuex ORM model as well. Just like in our item view, the template of this component relies on an object called item being present. So you'll see that we've got some bindings and interpolations throughout this component template. And if we come down to the component definition, you'll see that the item is a computed property and it's returning an empty object again. So it's waiting for us to go ahead and fill that out with the correct data. So firstly, what we want to do is import our item model again. Now we can replace the empty object down here with item, and we'll use the find method. And the ID gets passed in as a prop to this component, so we can just go ahead and use this .id like that. Coming over to our browser now, once the code rebuilds, you'll see that we're now seeing the correct data being rendered in our cart items. Now notice that the quantity input down here, where a user can modify the number of items in the cart, it's currently fixed to 0. And back in the cart item component template, you'll see that that input is represented here by this viewify component vText field, which is it's basically a text input. Now I've used a vModel on this to bind a local value quantity to that input. If we come down to our component definition, you'll see that quantity is just currently it's a computed property and it's just returning a fixed value of 0. So what we want to do now is bind quantity to the cart value of the relevant item in our store. Now the thing about vModel is that it's a two-way binding. It gets the value in order to display it, and it also sets the value when the user changes the input. Now two-way binding doesn't work out of the box with Vuex because you can't mutate store state directly. So what we can do is a little trick where we can define a custom getter and setter method for this computed property. So what we need to do is first transform this computed property from a function to an object, and then we can define two method properties. The first one will be get, and the second one will be set. Now set gets the value as an argument. So the get method here should return the cart quantity. So to do this, we'll query the item model. So we'll go return item.find this.id, and then all we need to do is just grab the cart property from that. For the setter, we need to update the item model's cart value. So let's begin by going item update, and we'll pass in an object. Now the first property you'll recall is where, and this is how we specify which cart item instance to update. Now for this one, we'll just specify that as this.id. And the second property is going to be data, and again we're going to make this a function property. We're going to pass in the item into this function, and now in the body of this function we can mutate the item. So what we're going to do here is assign item.cart is equal to val, like that. In other words, so whatever the new value that comes in into that quantity input, that's going to be assigned to the cart. Now remember that this val will be a string, so what we actually need to do is run this through parseInt to make it a number. With that done now, back in our browser, once we've added a cart item, you'll see that the quantity is set to 1. And we can actually change that to a different value. Let's take a look in the Vuex tab of View Dev Tools. And you'll see that we've got several updates in a row there. And obviously every time I press this, we get an additional mutation. So that basically tells us that it's working. So the next thing we need to do is get this remove button working. Looking at our cart item component again, you can see the remove button here as a Vuetify V button component. And you'll see that it has a click listener, which is this method remove from cart. So coming down here, we need to fill out that method now to make this work. So the idea is pretty simple. We just need to set the cart value of the relevant item to 0. So to do that, we're going to go item update again. And we'll pass an object to this. Once again, where will be this ID. And this time for data, we don't need a function for this. We can just specify that the cart value should be set to 0. Once the code rebuilds, the remove button should now work. So if I press it, you can see that that disappeared straight away from the cart. Now, one more thing before we finish. So notice that if we've got an item in the cart and we use the manual input and we actually want to change this value, the first thing we're likely to do is delete the existing value. But if we do that, you'll see that the item immediately disappears from the cart. That's because the value would have been set to a blank value, and it means that we're failing the filter that we put in our cart view. Now, the way I see it, we already have a remove button on this component, so I'd rather make it so that you can't just remove an item by deleting the value or setting it to 0, because I think in more cases than not, that would actually be an accident and would be a bit frustrating because they'd lose their cart item. So coming back to our cart item component, what I want to do here is in the quantity setter, we want to wrap the update logic in a conditional. So we want to go if val does not equal the string 0 and val does not equal a blank string, then we can update. So this basically means that anytime we do get a 0 or empty string, we're going to ignore that value. Let's test that code out now. So if we change our quantity to 0 or just a blank value, you can see that it will still stay in the cart. So I think that makes a bit more sense.